Hi, good evening. I hope this finds you well, and I also hope that you've had a very good week so far. After a very long time, I am bringing a book review, a very quick book review for you. Uh, these days, I'm reading a very important book called The Shortest History of Democracy. This is by a person called John Keane, who is a well known political theorist, and he's often referred to as one of the most prominent voices globally uh, for democracy. He's written creatively and critically about democracy for a few decades now. This is a very interesting book, and in fact, for me, anything that is historical is fascinating because that helps you to understand the nature of something, whether it's the history of science, mathematics, uh, you know, things like democracy and so on. So this is, of course, it cannot be said to be a strictly academic work. It's written for the lay person, and to help him or her understand what is this thing called democracy that we say we have in our country and which we so take for granted. How did it come about? And what of its future? What are its challenges? What are its greatest achievements? And so on and so forth. Uh, just to give you a sense of uh, how the book is located, it begins by, of course, saying that till a few years ago, maybe till 10 or 15 years ago, uh, democracy was lauded. It was the in thing. So starting the late 80s, when we had something called as the Velvet Revolution, which sought to overthrow communism, the grip of communism in Europe, and then that revolution was followed by a lot of civil unrest across the world, and a few other examples of very prominent examples of where people got together to decide how they wanted to live, how they wanted to govern themselves, and so on. And in the process, ended up overthrowing despots or dictators and so on. So the Arab Spring is a good example. The Orange Revolution, the Tulip Revolution. So all you can check out all of these, very fascinating developments on the web and acquaint yourself. Uh, but if that was the case, I mean, if that was the golden period not too long ago of democracy, we also nowadays talk of democratic backsliding. Uh, in fact, uh, India itself, I think, has been the subject of these comments, saying that we are at best an imperfect democracy, only an electoral democracy. So we talk of democracy only at the time of elections. We often nowadays talk about how institutions that are meant to safeguard the interests of people have been compromised, and that there is a democratic backsliding on the whole, right? As we move towards majoritarianism, many people say. So, somewhere, all the momentum of the 60s, and of course, when you go back to the Indian context itself, you had the ultra left movement, the Maoist movement, late 60s, and which survives to this day, of course, in some parts of India. So, what is it that has led to this democratic backsliding, if one were to use the term? So, these are the concerns with which the book opens up. And it's divided, of course, into three major sections. And what I also liked in particular was the very exhaustive timeline that is uh, provided all the way going back to 2500 BC till the present times. And at that time in 2005 500 before Christ BC, we had what was called as assembly democracy. Greek, Athens, that's the example that's given. That people used to get together in the form of an assembly in an open place, discuss, debate, decide what they wanted to do, how they wanted to live, and so on and so forth. Then the book moves on to electoral democracy, and lastly, it's a term that the author himself has coined, which is called as monetary democracy. Not in terms of monetary. That's not the term. It doesn't have anything to do with money. It's monetary. In fact, this refers to the emergence of institutions that are meant to be playing the role of watchdogs, ombudsmen, and so on. So whether it's monitoring of how budgets are spent, whether it is social audit, and so on and so forth. So the author argues that this form of democracy also is very important, that it gives the democratic ideal or the idea of democracy an edge, and it strengthens it further. I'm not going to take more time, but I want to read out a few things that really caught my attention, and in very few words, but very simple words, they communicate the essence of what this book is trying to achieve. So one is, let me just begin by reading from the early part of the book. Compared with political regimes such as tyranny and monarchy, whose legitimacy and durability depend upon fixed and frozen rules, democracy is exceptional in requiring people to see that everything is built on the shifting sands of time and place, and so, in order not to give themselves over to monarchs, emperors, and despots, they need to live openly and flexibly. I think this is really the essence of democracy, and that is what makes democracy so messy sometimes, and you get this feeling that it's really not working. And he goes on to say that democracy is the friend of contingency. Very beautifully put. With the help of measures such as freedom of public assembly, anti-corruption agencies, periodic elections, etc., it promotes indeterminacy. I think this is what I really liked, and it struck me as something very interesting. He goes on to also say that democracy has a wild quality, as the French thinker Claude Lefort liked to say. It tears up certainties, transgresses boundaries, and isn't easily tamed. I think in many ways, therefore, this book is all about the spirit of democracy, which is really that it is something living, it's dynamic, and unlike in a dictatorship or unlike in a monarchy, things are not fixed. Things are amenable to change, they can be challenged, they can be torn apart, something else can be put in its place, and so on. So I think this spirit permeates the entire book, the spirit of these particular statements. So do pick up your copy of John Keane's The Shortest History of Democracy, and it's not very difficult to read, as I said. You'll truly enjoy understanding the history of one of the most fascinating ideas that people have ever invented so far. How is it that we govern ourselves and be able to discuss that openly? Thank you very much. I hope you like this brief review, and more to come on Giri's Adda. And I know I'm coming back here after a very long time. Bye-bye. Take care. Have a lovely week and weekend.